Hello and welcome to episode 95 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live streaming career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. And in this episode of the podcast, delighted to be joined by Phil Veacock, best known as the main arranger, musical director and tenor saxophonist of Jools Holland's Rhythm and Blues Orchestra. Now, Phil has multiple connections and credits with Paul Weller, with arrangements and performances on every Weller album since 2017's A Kind Revolution, right through to 2021's number one LP, Fat Pop Volume 1. Phil shares his love of the jam, the Starr Council, and tells us all about creating with Paul Weller in recent years. You're going to love this one. Let's get into it. Hey, Phil, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking me on.
Oh, well, no, it's lovely to have you here, not least to talk about your connections with Mr. Weller, but also this fabulous career over the past, 25, 30 years, working with Jools Holland as well. We're going to dig into all this stuff. I'm really looking forward to this. And it's nice to hear that you're a fan of the podcast as well, which is always nice.
Yes, I've been listening. It's nice to hear members of the band talking. I was listening to Tom's one and Andy's one. It's funny hearing them saying, because I thought that it was just me, because I was like a really big Paul Weller fan, rather embarrassingly. And then when you get asked to sort of work with him, you kind of go, "Oh, it's Paul Weller." And I thought it was just me, but it's nice to hear Tom and Andy have had exactly the same reaction. You know, it was funny.
I want to go right back to the beginning and understand, first of all, where this love of music came from you. And I'm guessing it from the instrument that you play. I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing it started with the recorder. Exactly
right, actually. That is exactly right. When I was really tiny at my primary school, they you got sort of started. I think everyone kind of got a chance to do it, but I just really, for some reason, I just really took to it, and I became like a sort of recorder virtuoso. I just really loved it, and I could just do it quite well. The people who were sort of most expert at playing the recorder got to play the sort of hymns that everyone sang in school assembly, you know. But what that meant was that you kind of were apart. You were kind of on a little sort of bandstand. There was a teacher playing the piano, but you were kind of up there. Everyone else had to kind of sit down on the kind of school hall floor. You know, it was all kind of mucky and revolting. And you got to sit on a little chair looking over the people. And it was like you're kind of on the bandstand. And that, I think that kind of gave me like a sort of perspective. I kind of thought, I like this. This is good. Because they're sort of we're sort of part of it, and we're kind of leading it, and it's great, and it's really nice, but we don't have to kind of mix it with all the rabble on the floor, you know. Yeah. So kind of a bit sort of big-headed. But I became as I say, a bit of an expert and a bit of a show-off, and started sort of playing the recorder with my nose and things like that. So I mean, that's when my parents kind of said, "Well, we're going to get you something else to blow," and they got me a clarinet. So they started me on a clarinet. I was taught by a fantastic guy who was he was an RAF bandsman. He's called Bill Watson, because he was like a working musician. So he had various bands, and while I was having my lesson, people would phone him up and ask to book the band, and he'd be arranging kind of gigs and stuff. And I was thinking, this is cool. That'd be quite cool to do that. He's going to go off and play at a sort of some kind of party and stuff. He got me into like the kind of local sort of youth band, and it was a very good youth band. It was High Wycombe Music Centre, and finally made it to the dizzy heights of the kind of concert band, which was the kind of best one in the music centre that, all the youth bands. We went on a trip to Vienna, like an exchange thing, and we played in competitions and stuff, and quite often won because we were good. And I just loved the whole thing of like sort of being on the bus and like, see the older kids, it's just, the whole thing was just great, and coming back from a gig late at night, the kind of romance of that, being in a kind of bus going down the motorway at sort of midnight, Brilliant. I loved it. And I thought, I want to do this. This is great. And also, I wasn't really very much good at anything else.
The thing about the sax is, I think it's a wise instrument choice, I think.
Yes, thank you.
Because it's a handy instrument to carry around. It looks sexy as hell, doesn't it? When you're playing that.
Well, that was the other thing. Well, that's why I graduated onto the saxophone, which was because I was watching Top of the Pops and stuff and noticing that none of the bands had clarinets in them, apart from maybe Supertramp, who I didn't really like that much. But a lot of the bands had saxophones. And I thought, well, that looks a lot more glamorous. And the girls seemed to really like it. So I kind of made a fuss to move on to the saxophone, which I then did. That proved to be quite a good thing. There's a little story about Lester Young, the famous jazz tenor sax player, who, when he was a kid, he started in his older brothers had a band, and they put him on drums. And what he noticed was that all of his brothers copped off with all the good-looking girls because he was too busy putting his drums away. And by the time he put all his drums away, they'd all kind of cleared off with all the good-looking ladies. And he thought, this is wrong. So that's when he moved on to the saxophone. So there was a precedent,
I think I did say that to Rick Buckler, like the fact that it's a lot of there's a lot of stuff to carry around if you're a drummer, a lot of stuff to lug around.
Exactly.
The sax is dead easy, right? When was it that you first, as a Paul Weller fan, when was it you first discovered his music? When did it mean something?
Well, when obviously the jam started when I was at school. Everybody in my it sort of was at that time when sort of punk had was just happening, and lots of people and we were at that age where people were sort of starting to go to gigs and things like that. I wasn't really that kind of grown up really, but some friends of mine had gone, because the jam played. I come from High Wycombe in Bucks, and the jam I think did play in High Wycombe, and it was quite a big deal. A lot of people I knew went along to it and went, that was fantastic. And everyone started wearing sort of jam badges and on their school blazers and things like that. And we all read The Enemy and Sounds and Melody Maker, and that, when they kept poured over them and sort of see what was going on. And at my school, there was a new classroom was built at considerable expense, and they put all like new sort of tables and chairs in. There was a sort of emergency assembly was called one day, and the head teacher, the headmaster, said, now somebody has written their initials on the desk in the new classroom in a big black marker pen. And we are going to look through the school records to find out whose initials are JAN. And of course, whoever had done it wasn't me, but whoever had done it had written the jam logo with the kind of M with the thing going underneath, had done that on the desk. And they thought, in their ignorance, that it was like someone had written their initials. I think there was a lad who was called sort of John Mitchell or something that got sort of hauled up in front of the head teacher and sort of, no, it wasn't me, I didn't do it. But so beware of writing jam on things. But they were very popular. They were very, very popular at my school. I was a big fan. When we got to moving the story on a little bit, when I was at college and we started a band, my colleagues in the band weren't such great jam fans as I was, but because I was doing the brass for the band, I did sort of sneak in some jam rip-off things. Because by that time the jam had started using, it was the end of the jam really, and they'd started using a bit of brass, or like Beat Surrender and things like that. So we did sort of nick a few things. In fact, our first single, the band that we had was called The Larks. Our first single was called Billy Graham's Going to Heaven. The main brass line, I know my friend Pete, who sort of wrote it, he did nick that pretty much wholesale from the jam. There's a bit of plagiarism that went unnoticed.
Yeah, it's fair to say when Paul splits the jam, and when we'll come back to that and your feelings on that, but the Starr Council, he really embraces brass. There's a lot with that on those early
exactly.
releases, right?
Obviously, I loved that because he was sort of heading in a more sort of soul-y direction, wasn't he? That was very much up my Strasse, as they say.
So how did you feel when the jam called it a day, when Paul called it a day with the jam?
I don't think I wasn't sort of suicidal or anything, but I did sort of I thought, well, he's probably going to do something else that's pretty interesting, which is what he started doing. So I just sort of went along with it, really.
Did you get to see the Starr Council live?
Let me think. No. Because obviously, subsequently, I know Mick Talbot and also Steve a little bit, because Mick sort of lives around the corner from me. And also he stood in for Jools' brother, Chris. Like when I started playing for Jools, Mick came and did a tour, or maybe even more than that, with us, because we lived very near to each other. We used to travel together. had a very, very good laugh. He's very funny, Mick. He's a lovely, lovely man.
So take me through, how did the gig with Jools come about then?
I was in this band called The Larks. We had a moderation of success, and still it's sort of quite weird. It's got a sort of life after the band has finished. It's sort of got a bit of a life still. I mean, there are things that we did are sort of still quite popular in Japan and things like that. It's one of those things where it's kind of, it has taken on, mostly thanks to Mark Bannister, who was our guitarist, who's a sort of archivist, the sort of Bill Wyman of the piece. He's really made the band sort of live on after we finished. But anyway, we stopped doing stuff, and I was sort of wonder what I'm going to do now. I'd started playing in this crazy sort of big band. By now I was living in Deptford. There was a band that had been formed by Roger Gosselin and Paul Bartholomew of Goldsmiths. It was called the Deptford Dance Orchestra, and it was this kind of mad sort of band. I stood in for them. I wasn't even in the band at this point. Someone phoned me up and said, "Can you come and we need someone to do lead alto part. Can you come and do it for this gig at playing in a pub in Deptford?" I said, "Yeah, brilliant." I went along, and Jools came along. He'd been brought along by Ronnie Burrow, who was his sound engineer at the time. Jools had just left Squeeze and was just doing his first solo album, which was called World of His Own. He'd done the Tube, so he was pretty famous, and we all kind of went, "Who's Jools Holland?" And afterwards, he came over and he said, "Oh, I really like your playing. I need some brass for my album. I'm just doing this album. Can you come to my studio and record?" So me and a couple of the other guys went up and put some brass on his album. After that, it sort of felt like it all happened in about sort of a month, but I think it was probably over the course of a year or 2 years. First thing was that he was going on Wogan. Or at the time, Terry Wogan had that chat show that was on every night. Jools was going on and doing this song that had brass on it, which we hadn't actually played on. But he said, I need someone to come and do that. Can you come and do that? So he said, yeah, brilliant. So we went and did that. And then he said, "I'm doing the Edinburgh Festival. It'd be really good if you could come. I can't pay you much. You'll have to find your own accommodation." Well, as luck would have it, someone we knew was doing a play and had this flat. And there was like about sort of 400 people staying in this one flat. So we all stayed on the floor in this flat and had a high old time. It was brilliant. And did Edinburgh. That autumn, he said, "I'm doing some shows on the South Coast. Do you want to do those?" "Yes, please." So we used to go, we went on and played about 8 songs or something. And then gradually, we sort of became absorbed into the fabric of the band, which is the way it sort of goes with Jools' stuff, really. People come along and then they don't go away again. It's like a kind of one of those things that just gathers more and more as it kind of rolls down the hill, like more and more things like gather on it. After that, we were the house band for Don't Forget Your Toothbrush. It's the kind of daddy of all those Ant and Dec's Saturday takeaway type shows, where they kind of get the audience. And I don't know if you look too young to remember, Dan.
No, I was in the audience.
Don't Forget Your Toothbrush. Were you there?
Yeah, I was there on the share night. Yeah.
Are you kidding? Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, so did you have your suitcase all packed and stuff?
Yeah, you had to. And weirdly, I went with my mum, which was all
right.
But yeah, I was obsessed with Chris Evans. I absolutely love Chris Evans.
Oh wow, yeah. Well, it was. We had an absolute blast doing that show. It was completely brilliant. It was really, really, really good fun. Unfortunately, we did all just get completely plastered every week. It was shocking for our livers after the show because it went live, and I think just the kind of afterwards, the whole just euphoria of it. Everyone would just go and drink and have a big party. And it really was a big old drink every week. Yeah, probably good that it ended for our health.
Yeah.
But it was really, really good fun doing that. It was brilliant. And then every week there'd be like a great guest on. I mean, it had some fantastic people. The Cher one was amazing because she came to rehearse. I think for some reason she was rehearsing at Jools' studio. We didn't usually rehearse at Jools' studio, but for some reason she was coming in a helicopter and she wanted to land her helicopter on Blackheath. And it was like all kinds of like, oh no, the police won't allow it. And, you can't, no, it's not possible. And, there was all kinds of stuff like that. She was very funny. I think she was just having a laugh, really. I don't think she was being a diva. I think she was pretending to be a diva. She said that the dressing rooms at London Weekend television were not good enough. What she needed was a suite at the Ritz, the Savoy, sorry, which is just over the other side of Waterloo Bridge. So I think they did have to get her a suite at the Savoy, and then a car to get her from the Savoy over Waterloo Bridge to London Weekend Television. She's like a kind of, let's face it, it's about a 5-minute walk at best.
Yeah. They were longer in the car, yeah.
Yeah, it probably was longer in the car. She was great. She was very funny. But I think the best guest that we had on that show was Barry White, who was just amazing. And that particular show was the last one of the series, and it was the one where they sent the whole audience to Disneyland.
That's right, yeah.
And everybody got to go. And Barry White was just completely bemused by the whole thing. I don't know what his agent had sort of told him, what he was doing, but he had to sing Bring Me Sunshine, which was the theme tune, and that was quite amusing. When he arrived, it was boiling hot. It was the summer, and it was boiling hot weather. And he was wearing this massive overcoat, and he was huge. I mean, he's like sort of 6'8" or something. He's a very, very tall man, and obviously very large, and just wearing this massive coat. And he was, I remember thinking, he's like, you know, when you're a kid and you have a mental image of what God looks like. And that's what he was like. And there was one point where, because we got a big string section in for him, obviously because of his sound, he needs a big sort of string section. And at one point the strings went wrong, and he was stood by Jools's piano, and he whacked the piano with his hand was the size of a frying pan, and he whacked Jools's piano, which was mic'd up. And he went, big sort of like load of reverb, and he went like that. And everyone just went, ah! And he wasn't, I don't think he was cross or anything. It was just, that's just how he was, you know. But he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Loved it.
I remember that show very fondly, I have to say, and the musical guest, and that was great. And I guess then, so at that point, is your role already changing where you're becoming as much of a musician as you are an arranger? You start arranging things with Jools as well.
Yes, well, as the band grew, the stuff needed to be arranged more, because when there's fewer of us, we could just sort of do it by saying, right, you play that note, you play that note. As more and more people sort of came along, and Toothbrush was a case in point, because quite often things would be augmented by more musicians, like the Barry White one. At the same time, we started to do the Hootenanny, the New Year's Eve TV show, and that was with a big band. And obviously, if you've got a big band, people listening who don't know what a sort of standard lineup for a big band is, you usually have 4 trumpets and 4 trombones and 5 saxophones, and then a sort of full rhythm section. With that amount of musicians, you need to have a proper arrangement so that people aren't sort of doubling up the same notes and playing the same things. And it needs to be properly arranged, musically arranged. And that's sort of where I started doing that, really. I mean, I'd sort of done it before with the Deptford Dance Orchestra and various other things. It wasn't like a complete shock. But as we sort of progressed, and as Jools's band became the big band, it became the Rhythm and Blues Orchestra that it is today, which is like a sort of full big band. You know, whenever a new song comes along, it does need sort of arranging. Yeah, that became more my role, as well as playing. And
I'm guessing because Paul's been on later and Hootenanny, I mean, so many times now. Yes. Done specials as well, like Stanley Road was a whole special, and Soul, I think, as well. I'm guessing that's where you first played with Paul would have been linked to that.
Yeah,
song.
Yeah, and I think that because I think he might have been even on that very first Hootenanny. I can't remember. It's all sort of a bit of a blur in my head. I remember him coming on and me thinking, oh my God, that's Paul Weller. I love his stuff. And I thought I may never sort of work with him again, so I better tell him how much I love him. so I did make a bit of an idiot of myself at the end of I remember going up to him at the end of the whole day thinking, I've got to do it now, because otherwise I won't ever get a chance. And saying, oh, excuse me, Paul. I just wanted to say, thanks so much for all the great music that you've given, that you've given to us. And he just went, yeah, thanks. Thanks, man. Yeah, thanks. And that was my first. I think that was my first initial kind of encounter with him. Luckily, I don't think he sort of remembered that or bore any grudge or anything like that. Because subsequently, we did like lots more stuff. Jools did a series of albums called Small World, Big Band, which was lots of guests would come and sing with the band. And he's kind of carried on doing that ever since, really. But Paul was on the first one of those, and I think I played the solo on it. I think it's called I'm Gone, which was Jools Road.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember if I'm on the recording. I definitely played the solo when we did it live. We did it on either a later or a hootenanny. I can't remember. But anyway, that was, yeah. Then I think really my sort of getting to work with Paul in more detail. Jools was doing another record called, I think it's called The Golden Age of Song. Paul was a guest on that. I was doing all the arranging pretty much at that point. Nowadays, it's kind of spread. There's more of a sort of arranging stuff. It's sort of better really because it kind of gives a sort of different perspectives on things, you know, rather than just one person's vision. So I was doing Paul's song, which was he wanted to do the song September in the Rain, which is an old song. I'd just been given the brief to arrange this tune and I didn't really know quite what he wanted. So I'd done like a kind of Nelson Riddle Sinatra-y kind of version, which actually to this day, I heard it again fairly recently and I thought, yeah, that's great. It was good. It was a nice arrangement, you know. But anyway, Paul came and did it, and then later that day, he phoned me up and he said, yeah, I really liked your arrangement. It's not at all what I wanted to do with that song. Can you do it again? And then he sort of said, I've been listening to this sax player called Lynn Hope. And I'd never heard of Lynn Hope. And he's a very obscure saxophone player from the 1950s. He converted, he was sort of famous in the 1950s, and he died in 1993. He converted to Islam, and he was kind of famous for wearing a turban, on stage, even though he wasn't a Sikh or anything like that. Right. And he's got quite an unusual sort of sound. Anyway, it's a very obscure sax player. And Paul said, I want to do it. I've been listening to this guy, Lynn Hope, and I want to do it like him. He gave me this CD to listen to, the only sort of CD of Lynn Hope in existence, as far as I can tell. A really obscure kind of guy. I couldn't really get what he was talking about. I mean, I liked it, but I couldn't really quite sort of see it. Anyway, I sort of thought, well, he's Paul Weller, so he ought to know what he's on about. So I tried to get some of this guy, Lynn Hope, his kind of sound and everything into the arrangement. The other thing that Paul said was, I wanted for it to be more French. I went, oh, okay. So, so these mad sort of, and trying to kind of figure all this stuff out. So we got Geraint Watkins. I don't know if you've heard of Geraint Watkins, a fantastic piano player and singer, and he plays the accordion. Does quite a lot of work with Nick Lowe and all those musicians. Really great player and a lovely, lovely man. Anyway, we got him in on the session and we did this new version and we did one take of it. And if you have the album of Golden Age Song, this is the take that is on the album. It was the first take, and actually if you listen carefully, you can hear me shouting out chords to the rhythm section at the end because we hadn't sort of properly gone through it. And also the other thing you can hear is Jools' brother was late for the session. You can hear him arriving. If you've got very good
sounds like a right shambles.
Anyway, the end result is absolutely brilliant and it's lovely. So yeah, that's very good. But it reminds me of those sort of Motown things where you can hear people using the water fountain outside and things like that.
One of the things that's fascinating about that as well is, here's a guy who's been, known and playing music, let's say professionally, like with a record deal for like 45 years now, right? And still wanting to discover new music. So much of the new music and new artists.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that I discover comes through him. I'm going to see the Mysterins tonight. That's a Paul Weller recommendation that I now love. Right. They're a great band. But he's also digging into the past as well and going back and finding obscure stuff and recommending and liking that too. It's amazing. Very, very much so, yeah. And that sort of carried on. I think the next thing was that he phoned me up. He wanted to do a recording of They Say It's Your Birthday by the Beatles for Paul McCartney for his birthday, and he wanted to give it to him. So he said, can you do the brass on that? So we went down and did that.
And then after that, he just kept phoning up to do more and more stuff.
Here we are, Kind Revolution, an album that I've noticed on this tour that he's just been doing. Woozy Mama, the opening track, he's been playing live again. So, it's a really stand-up album. So you're sax on Nova, and then two different types of sax. And I'd love to know what the differences are, but baritone and tenor sax on a track called Hopper. So let's talk about those tracks. How did those come about, and what are your memories of the album?
With Nova, I think he wanted like that kind of Mock the Hoople kind of grunty sort of rock sax, like just going like that sort of gruntiness. And a baritone, a mixture of the baritone and the tenor kind of really does that. I think his instruction was to bring as many saxophones as I had, which that would have filled up a small van, but I did bring a tenor and a baritone down for that session. And Hopper, I think you just can't really remember any specific instruction for that.
Hopper it's about an artist, isn't it?
Yeah, about Edwin Hopper. Yeah.
Who I wasn't really aware of, I'll be honest, until I heard the song and then kind of found the connection. But
great, Edwin Hopper. He is like sort of those. His famous one is the Nighthawks, people in the bar at night in New York. The sort of urban loneliness kind of vibe. Yeah, I can't really remember too much about the instructions for Hopper. I remember that it did change quite a lot in the studio. Paul. He's very good at taking what you give him and then sort of moulding it. If it's not quite there, he's very good at just going like that and just turning it just a little bit to make it exactly what he wants. He's very good at doing that.
How much are you playing live as a band together versus you playing your bits and then layering them up later on in Pro Tools?
Oh, that was we recorded the brass thing. The tracks had already been recorded. Brass are kind of like extra bits on top. So the band have already been in and recorded the main tracks. They're in some sort of shape. So yeah, I think we did Hopper with him on later. And then the next one was True Meanings.
Yes, so I've got that here. I know this is a podcast, but I like holding them up because I just like the feel of the vinyl. That's a beautiful thing.
It's a great cover, yeah. It's very good. It's very nice. I've not really ever seen the vinyl before. That's good, isn't it?
Oh, it's
nice. It's so much nicer, aren't they, records? Let's face it.
Well, they are nicer, but let's be honest, really effing inconvenient, right? So side one, this is a double album, right? So side one, 4 tracks. I've then got to get up, turn it over. The 3 tracks on side 2, the same on side 3, 4 tracks, 3 tracks on side 4. It's not massively convenient compared to just shouting at Alexa. Do you know what I mean?
Well, no, true. But what was interesting about doing that one was that it was quite different from things I've done in the past, whereby he was using the brass section more as a texture or a colour rather than us playing specific lines. We were much more just a sort of a flavour. Then so there's like a little sort of, there's some brass there, or there's like a little sort of thing underneath that. I loved it. I think it's great. The songs on that are absolutely amazing. Mayfly and all those, Soul, what's it called? Soul?
The Soul Searchers.
Yeah, great. It's a beautiful song. When we came to do the other aspects, the Festival Hall show, it kind of went into that really. It was more to do with the colour and the flavour of the brass. Obviously, because we were doing older songs on that, kind of meant that there were quite a lot of lines and things, but it still had that same kind of thing of the brass section not being used as like for playing like little sort of tunes, but actually just kind of adding a flavour, which went really with Hannah's orchestra stuff. Hannah Peel and I worked on that together, trying to blend the orchestra with the band. That was the kind of the key thing of that, really.
Those 2 albums together, there's a package because they are obviously connected, and it's the orchestra, and Hannah, and all that. So True Meanings, you're arranging, playing Mayfly, moving on. That album closer as well, White Horses, which is just a bloody awesome.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
But then other aspects is, like you say, it's a kind of extension of that. But then there's also digging into some of these older songs like Private Hell, for instance, from the Jam, right?
Yes.
Full Circle.
Well, I was very, I was very pleased with that. obviously, you know, that's a jam song. And what I did, I was very happy. I'd like to claim that I came up with the Smokey Robinson and the Miracles bit on the bit, think of Edwin still at that bum, which Steve Craddock really loved. And he actually is, I think there's some sort of little film where he kind of talks about that bit because he liked it so much. I'd like to big-headedly put my hand off and claim that bit, please. That's my idea.
Why the heck not? Because Boy About Town was another one, wasn't it, from the jam?
Yeah, and was the Butterflies one. That's great. Yeah. Amongst Butterflies, which that's the one on the festival hall where he actually introduced the brass section, because it was quite tricky. It's quite a tricky opening. It's a great brass section, and they were going to play. Then we had to play that really hard bit, so make sure you get it right. Once you've been, because you've just been introduced, because everybody's listening now.
And the guys who are playing with you, so we had Alistair White, Chris Starr, and Jess Holder. Yeah. How are they connected? Are they part of Jools' band? Are they just?
Yes, they were. I mean, all those people have at one time or other been in Jools' band, Chris is still with us. Jess has moved on, and Alistair he's like a sort of genius, really, Alistair. So he just kind of does it. Anyone that needs a good trombonist, they get Alistair because he's amazing. I think he won the Young Jazz, BBC Young Jazz Musician of the Year or something years ago. Right. He's very, very good.
Now, the thing about True Meanings is still really recent for me. Well, this is like 3-4 years ago. And it wasn't quite a number one album, which seems ludicrous. But anyway, since then, we've had 2 new albums from Paul and another live album, the Barbican gig. Yeah. So let's go through those. So On Sunset, 2020, The Saviour of Lockdown. Yeah. What a beautiful summer album that was.
Yeah. Well, that was good fun doing that. There was one, which is the one that's got the post horn on it. I can't even remember the name of the track now. I think it might be on Walking. But there's like a post horn. Paul said, I want a like post horn sound. And I was at my mother-in-law's for Sunday lunch one week, just before we did the session. And I noticed that she had hanging up on the wall this old antique post horn, like a big long one, right? Great big long sort of post horn. I said, Sheila, is that actually a thing, or is that like a sort of fake one? She's no, it's a genuine post horn. It's like really, it's an antique one, it's like original thing. It's quite valuable. I said, well, you wouldn't mind if I borrowed that, would you, to put on the so I said, no, that's all right. She was very nicely allowed me to take it. And Chris Starr played the actual antique post horn that you can hear on that track going like that. It's actual proper. And we've got very good photos because it's so long. He couldn't get the right amount of pressure. He had to hold it close to his mouth to get the right amount of pressure on his lip because it's a very kind of narrow mouthpiece. So Alistair and John Ferkel, who was doing the other trumpet, because it's so long, it needed someone else to hold it whilst he played it. So we got photos of him actually playing the post horn on that. But on that album, there was some great directions from Paul. I think there's a little interview that I did where I talked about it. I think one of them he said to me, I want this to sound like the James Last Orchestra going on holiday to New Orleans. So if you make it sound like that. So I went, okay, Paul, right.
Piece of cake.
So I went off and sort of tried to make that work. Yeah, I think it works. So I think that might be the end of Walking as well. It does that. I think my favourite one on that is the actual On Sunset track. I think that's great, really good. I said to Andy, who was playing the flute, I want it to sound like, I don't know if you know that Randy Crawford song called Rio de Janeiro Blue. It ends with almost exactly the same way as On Sunset, with the kind of waves in the flute. I think it's Ernie Watts is the guy who's playing the flute on the Randy Crawford one. Beautiful. He's such a great player. It's a brilliant flute playing. Really lovely. Really good. But the actual sectional stuff, I love on that as well, and the way it blended with the girls, the backing vocals. Really not. I love that track. I think it's a great track. That.
Yeah. That's the staves, isn't it, on the backing? Is that on that one?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a special LP that I think there's so many stand-up moments. Baptiste is one of my favourite ones, I have to say. And I don't think he's played that live yet. I don't think I've seen anywhere where he's played that live. It's a brilliant song.
Yeah, I got very fanboy excited about the fact that there's a bit on Equanimity where Jimmy Lee from Slade does the little violin solo, and then a few bars later, I sort of basically duet with him. I do like a little clarinet bit, and when I came out, I was going, I want to sing with Jimmy Lee. It's amazing because I was such a big Slade fan, when I was a kid. So yeah, that was very exciting.
Brilliant. Well, and it must be nice to see, there it is, the reception it gets, but also another number one album from
Paul. I was made up when I saw it was number one. I was going around sort of going, oh, the number one album. But it's the first time that had ever happened, So I was very pleased about that.
Less than a year later, we then have Fat Pop Volume 1 and another number one album.
Yes, but I'm not sure that I'm on that. I might be. I don't know.
No, you are. You're on you're on In Better Times. Saxophone on In Better Times.
I'm going to have to check this out then more, because just before the lockdown hit, I went down to Black Barn and played on some stuff. And Paul, he wasn't really sure what it was. I think he said he was thinking of it, that it was going to be an EP. I remember that, because I think that's the last time I went down. I think that's the last time he called me, actually. But anyway, I went, and I was a bit worried because I took my daughter came down with me, my daughter Daisy, and she is just starting out. She's a very good singer and songwriter, and she's just sort of starting out. And I said, look, come down, because he's really, really nice and he won't mind. You can just kind of watch what goes on and, just hang out. I went into the actual studio and she stayed in the control room with Paul and Stan and Charles. By the time I've been in there for ages. And by the time I came out, her and Paul were like sort of best buddies. He sort of was getting her to play him all her demos, and, he made her play him a demo over the studio speakers, and he was really lovely. And he said, oh, it's great, I really like this. He's giving her advice, and, really, really nice, which he didn't need to do. He could have just sort of gone, what are you doing bringing your daughter down? It's what are you doing? But he was just so lovely about the whole thing. Anyway, I was slightly worried because he hasn't called me since.
He's fuming.
Yeah. Perhaps he thought, oh, what a liberty bringing his daughter there. I'm sure he didn't. Yeah,
well, it's interesting because Fat Pop, I think, from what I've read, was done in a very different way. Quite a lot of it with obviously everybody in lockdown doing things remotely, sending them in and stuff. And
sure.
It's amazing that he keeps moving forward, keeps wanting to do new material, and he's not just kind of
definitely,
not just digging into the desktop.
He knew that this is a sort of an example really of that, because he knows that one of my big heroes is Tubby Hayes, the sax player Tubby Hayes, and he knew some guys who'd done a documentary about Tubby Hayes, and he got them to send me the DVD and like kind of the whole sort of package thing. Oh, it's really great, because he didn't need to do that. It was just like a sort of look. He went, oh, you really like Tubby Hayes, don't you? I'll get him to send you a thing. And he didn't forget. Because people sort of say those things, don't they? But he's there it was. It arrived like a week later. Brilliant.
Nice. Yeah, really nice.
Yeah, really nice. Really, really nice.
Now, we also have to talk about a couple of things. The one, obviously, we're getting back to live music now. We're getting back on the road. How does it feel getting back out there with Jools and the Rhythm and Blues Orchestra again?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's so brilliant. We managed to do our autumn-winter tour last year, and we managed to complete the whole thing. We didn't get any COVID problems. I think it was maybe the last show one of the singers missed because she got COVID. But we were very, very strict. Everyone had to test every day. No guests. It was a treat, actually, because no guests were allowed backstage at any point. So
you have to do all that schmoozing, that mingling.
Exactly. We could just sort of relax. And I think everyone quite liked that, to be honest. Not that we don't love our guests, but, it's quite nice to have that sort of peace and quiet. It was quite a nice sort of thing. But because we did that, I think we all managed to kind of stay COVID-free. And I think we're going to continue doing that. We've got some shows in Europe coming up, and then our sort of summer dates. We've got quite quite a lot of summer dates. So I think that's going to stay, the sort of testing, regular testing. And
I mentioned to Dave Swift when he was on the podcast, it's always a great night out seeing you guys live. It's such a brilliant, it's a party night, isn't it? It's great.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Well, that's our aim,
And it's always nice to see the little surprises. Gary Crowley the other week was talking about meeting Lulu at a cafe. I saw Lulu performing with you guys once. Chris Difford, who's been on the
great.
podcast.
Lulu's fabulous. Yeah.
So there's Mark Almonds. There's amazing people that you work with as well.
Well, my as I say, my daughter Daisy is kind of just starting out. She did a couple of supports for Jools before Christmas, and Lulu came out with us when my daughter and her sister were really tiny, and they used to call her Auntie Lulu. And so now when Daisy did her supports just before Christmas, Lulu was by the side of the stage whooping and hollering, and Daisy was going, "Look, it's Auntie Lulu, it's my Auntie Lulu." All of her band, Daisy's band, were kind of going, "Who is that woman?" They go, "She's going, it's Auntie Lulu." They go, "Well, who's that?" She won the Eurovision Song Contest, did a Bond thing, that sort of thing.
I also, before you go, we have to talk about bread making. So this is, a lot of people were making bread during lockdown. It was a new thing. Yeah. But for you, it went kind of full thing. Yeah.
Well, the story with that, it was a godsend, really. Years and years ago, my friend and I, it all started, our kids were at primary school, and all the dads, there was like a sort of a group of dads, and we'd go to the pub. And one night in the pub, we were sort of saying, "This is great, but it's not very, it's not very good for us just kind of going to the pub, and it's a bit, why don't we try and find something else that we could do all together that would be a bit more useful?" And there was a place that just opened, and they were offering sort of, you went for a night and you did like a sort of introduction to making bread and all that. So let's try that. It looks like quite a laugh. So we went and did that. It was great. It was really good fun. And you sort of took your own booze along, and it was like you could have a drink and you were doing making this bread and having a laugh. That went well. So then they did like an advanced course. So we said, "Well, should we do that? That would be good." So we did that. And of course, blokes being blokes, it all became like very kind of competitive. We all started baking bread at each other and going, "Look, I've made a whatever is sourdough rice, this is, all this." And who could bake the best bread? Anyway, people fell away, and it was just ended up with me and my friend Simon, and we kind of continued doing it. And what we decided to do is like, just because we were making this bread, and there's more than we could eat before we were trying, and people were asking us, "Can we buy a loaf off you?" Blah blah blah. So we started sort of selling the bread. We would do it every morning. We'd sell bread at the school gates. Simon, he's a carpenter, and he got sort of fed up with being a carpenter. I suppose you'd say he had a bit of a midlife crisis, and he decided he didn't want to do carpentry anymore. He wanted to go into the baking in a much bigger way. So he built himself a sort of bakery in his garden, like a bread, we called it the bread shed. Got all sort of industrial ovens in there and all the proper stuff. And he sort of went into it in a very big way. We were supplying sort of local cafes and delis and stuff. And it was all getting a bit out of hand because I already had a job. I was going, I can't really keep up with this, So I said, "Look, you carry on doing it. I'm turning in my bread basket." He carried on doing it. He was making all the croissants and the pastries, and amazing. His bread's incredible. It's really delicious. Then, of course, the lockdown came along. So, really, there's no gigs, and, I haven't got any money. And he said, "Well, look, I've rushed off my feet because I've got all these orders. People want stuff delivered. Let's get a little van, and you can deliver all the bread and the croissants and all that." So that was my lockdown job. I was bread delivery man. What a great job! I loved it. It was really good because people were always happy to see me. You knock on their door and you go, "Look, I've got these lovely croissants and this like sort of these cinnamon buns and this lovely loaf for you." And they go, "Oh, fantastic. Brilliant. I've just made some coffee as well." Hey. So everyone was happy to see me, and it was a really lovely little lockdown job. It was brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, now I've got a bit too busy to but I still make bread just for the family. It's more of a hobby now. It got out of hand.
I love that. That's classic guys, though, isn't it? It's like, you start out with just the course, and then actually everybody's trying to do the next one.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm better than you.
Try my plaited loaf. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Phil, this has been so fabulous. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I have two final questions for you. So you're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. What are you going to go with?
I knew you were going to ask me this, and I did try and think about it, but I just couldn't think of one song, because I find with Weller songs that there's little bits of them, there's like little corners of his songs that just get in your head and stick there, and like things, something will happen and it will just spring into your head, little phrases, little
Are you saying that you need like a little Stars on 45 medley? Is that what you mean?
No, I think if pushed. Okay, so if pushed, I'd say probably maybe Broken Stones. That would be up there. It's a long, long road. That one.
Oh yeah,
I love that one. That'll probably be my two, I guess. But there's so many. I mean, there's so many, and that's not to say that it wouldn't be completely different tomorrow, or even later on today. Those are the two that I'm thinking of at the moment.
Okay, what would you put on straight after this conversation?
I think I'm going to have a listen to that track that I'm apparently on Fab. Because I can't remember it, so I think I'm going to have a listen to that.
In Better Times, it is. In Better Times. It's the penultimate track on the album, yeah.
Right. I have listened to it, but I can't recall that one. But I'd probably listen to that, and then I'll probably go back and listen to a bit of True Meanings. I think that would probably be it. Mayfly and Soul Searchers, maybe.
Right, final question. So the purpose of this podcast is obviously to chat to amazing people like you and your career and hear about that and your connections with Mr. Weller. But really, deep down, let's all be honest, it's for me to get the interview with Paul Weller that I never managed during my radio career.
Yeah.
If it happens, what should I ask him?
When I was listening to Gary Crowley's podcast with you, and his answer to that question I thought was absolutely ingenious. You'd ask him what of his work he likes the best, because that would be fascinating to know. I'd really like to know that. Yeah, what would you ask him? How would I phrase this? Why? How is he so cool? What's at the bottom of that? How can he remain so cool after so many years? Because that's tricky, isn't it? That's a tricky business to kind of remain like credible and just cool after all this time. The first time I went to Black Barn, and there was in the toilet, there's a kind of cover from the NME from like really early, and it's Paul is kind of got like a sort of loincloth on, and he's got like kind of war paint on, and he's coming out of a kind of bush with a sort of arrow or something, like a sort of African tribesman or something.
Yeah, and
it's I think the headline something like Weller Goes Native or something like that, and that was like in sort of 1982 or something. And you go, well, that's so long ago. How's he managed to kind of stay like so kind of great and so kind of cool after all these years? It's very impressive thing. I think he'll always be like that, wouldn't he? I don't think. Yeah. But what does he think? What does he think? That would be quite a good question, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a nice one, because also, I mean, like the clothing, and he obviously takes care and how he looks, he's stylish. But the thing I was thinking the other day, we went for a walk with the kids, and as you do, early spring walk, muddy old day. He's got young kids. I was like, what's he wearing in the woods? I can't imagine him in wellies. Can you?
No, I actually can. I think when you go down there and he pops to the fish and chip shop in his mini, he's quite normal like that, I think. I think he probably has got wellies. Yeah. They're probably pretty cool, stylish wellies, but nevertheless.
On a Monday night when he's like, he's getting ready for bed, he's just done his teeth, and he's like, shit, I forgot to put the bins out. He's not going down in his pajamas, is he, out the front, surely, It's all things like that.
He is, I think, I know. I mean, it's the same with Jools, really. You kind of think, well, he's not going and buying vegetables in Sainsbury's, is he? Maybe that's where we're going wrong, Dan. You're going to have people to do that stuff for you.
That's the dream, man. That's the dream. If this podcast takes off, you never know, right? Phil, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Dan.
I hope to see you live with the big band Orchestra and with Jools
nice
at some point soon. But cheers, man. This has been great.
All right, lovely. Thank you.
My thanks once again to Phil Veacock for joining me on the podcast. Check out my show notes for more information on this episode. Just head to my website, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. You'll find an article up there with lots of links and things you can listen to. In fact, I've made a playlist so you can hear Phil's contributions to Paul Weller's music as well. All the details, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. Whilst you're there, if you fancy it, you can buy me a virtual coffee or gift yourself or a friend some of our new exclusive official merchandise. We've also got some live podcasts coming up. Halifax as part of Paul Weller Day, July the 3rd, when Paul plays Halifax. Plus news coming soon on some big things we're doing at the exhibition in Brighton. This is the Modern World. All the details, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. Don't forget to share a link to this podcast on your social media channels. If you've enjoyed it, please do leave a 5-star review as well. And get in touch on social media at WellerFanPod on Twitter or on Instagram and Facebook, Paul Weller Fan Podcast. In the next episode of the podcast, we hear from Debsy Wicks. One-time Dolly Mixture and Paul Weller record label signing, tells us all about her experiences in music and beyond over the past 40 plus years. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.